Yeah, why not?
Who gets the beanbag?
Ladies and gentlemen,
And the rest of us.
Where?
our guest of honour is about to be interviewed. Jaine Fenn.
As we've never met before, Jaine. So, you grew up in a house without any books. How did you get into sci-fi and fantasy?
TV, short answer. No, a little bit more than that. I would see things on telly and film or whatever, and I would think, that's great. Does W.H. Smith have, because that was when W.H. Smith, what did that had the novelisations of things. So the earliest one, and no one's going to remember this, was something called The Rescuers. It was like you see, I was like 7 or something. I just learned to read, and I'm like, I want to read something that's not just the Janet John books. So I went and got the book of that. Doctor Who was great, so I had 37, I was very proud of them, 37 Doctor Who novels. That was, yeah, definitely a matter of pride. Star Wars, I saw Star Wars. That was probably the first hard-ish SF that I read, age 10, 12, whatever. And that was compelling. I remember being underneath the sheets with the fighting scene. I knew who won. I'd seen the film, but it was just what I wanted. But the moment for me where I went beyond that, because I didn't really know what any of these other books were, and although we had a library, it didn't have an SF section. I know a lot of people here probably, it was the SF section in your local library. As was tiny, we lived down in the sticks, and we went there about once every 3 months. But one of those moments that you remember, on holiday at Wookie Hole, stay with me, this does go to books, and they had a gift shop there, and in the gift shop I remember seeing a book, and it had a picture, and it was kind of like stained glass almost the way it's done, of a young man changing into a hawk, and it said, The Wizard of Earthsea, and I thought, I like that, just for the cover, because I knew nothing about it, and that was the point at which, I was 9, that was the point at which it all took off somewhat. And I mainly got into fantasy initially, because I just didn't really have an in science fiction except for the tie-ins. I couldn't quite relate to it, because I didn't have the science. I wish I had, I'm still catching up on a lot of classic stuff, but I was well obsessed with Tolkien. I went to school with Tolkien's granddaughter, and she was a bitch. Another seminal and not so good moment is I was rereading Fellowship of the Ring, which I do flat in school because I didn't want them to know I wasn't reading a Daniel Steele novel. And she came up to me and she stuck her finger in it and she said, my granddad wrote that. She was 2 years above me and I thought, it's Tolkien. She can't be related to him. And it was like one of those moments where your world is like, how could he, the genius of Middle-earth, have produced this tennis-playing bitch? There we go. I've gone off topic, I'm going to keep doing that.
That's fantastic. Fine, that's the way Armadacon.
That's why we've got lots of questions.
There's lots of random questions here, so I'll follow the list at least until she goes completely off topic. When did you first realise you wanted to write the science fiction and fantasy stuff?
I realised I think I always wanted to write. I always did storytelling of some sort. My earliest quote story is a recording on a cassette tape of me coming up with my own Star Trek. Oh yeah, I've got Star Trek as well as Doctor Who, obviously. My own Star Trek story, aged 5, and that probably still exists because I gave it to the linguistics department at university, at the Poly as it was then, as an example of language development, because it had my brother going ga 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 on the opposite side of it. So that may still exist, it may not. I decided I wanted to be an author when I realised I was going to be a ballet dancer. Yes, I know, we've all been there, probably not all the men, but quite a lot of the women have. I stood a better chance than most ballet dancers, because I did already exams and stuff, but I was never going to make it, and thank God I didn't try. As for why I write SF and fantasy, it literally did not occur to me to write anything else. And this is something that I can rant about to the converted, because when people tell us that what we write is like escapist, or it's niche, or it's genre over there, and I've got a talk which I could have done, but this is more fun, about why it isn't, and also I don't need to tell you guys, is that why would we limit our stories to the here and now, or even history? Nothing wrong with history. Why on earth would we only tell our stories in the world that we see? How limiting is that? How boring is that? I want everything. I want everything that's ever been, that ever could be. I want space. I want alternate histories. I want all that stuff. Or something like that, yeah. I don't need to rant to you, you will agree on that one, but yes. I've now left converted.
That's all fine. Book deal.
I'll jump straight to that one.
Yeah, well, that was the next one on the list.
Is it?
Yeah.
No, you took it.
I'm not going against the list.
Yeah.
I'm not that.
Oh, yeah, the right to pages rather than
Yeah,
the recent
yeah,
story about
yes.
hangover. Right, we'll get to the hangover story.
Okay, we'll do that as well.
We will do that, that's the next one, it's number 4.
Okay, we'll do together.
Okay,
Do them together.
so obviously I wanted to, as this is my autobiography, you're now with me, sort of in my teens, etc. I've written some very bad SF, I didn't know it was very bad. And I did make, I don't really do regrets, but something I should have done, tried harder to do, was to learn the craft. But this is like the late 80s, early 90s. There wasn't the online resources, there wasn't evening courses, there wasn't much to learn the craft from. There were a few books, but once I read, I was like, I don't know how this helps me. I'm a lot of the new agey bollocks or something. I'm just like, no, I'm not sure about that. So I didn't learn the craft. At the same time, also, my first proper job, my first proper job was in IT, which I hated, and it was long hours and it was horrible. And when I got home, I wanted escapism. I wanted to watch TV, or watch videos of Star Trek or whatever, or I wanted to play role-playing games, or I wanted to do something else. I did some writing, a bit, but there was no immediate gratification on that. So one of the main reasons was I did an awful lot of writing and running of role-playing games in the 90s, what they're now called homebrew, I think they call it, when you're writing your own thing. And that's where everything went, because I did do some, I had a story published really early on in a magazine in Ireland, which never paid me and was basically a rip-off, and the story was shit. And they basically looked at this crap story from this like 18-year-old or whatever, and they thought, well, we can just publish that and not pay them. So that was quite annoying, which did teach me useful lessons for publishing, which I'll try not to rant about later. But the other thing is a story I sent to Interzone, which obviously is one of the main markets then, in about 94, got a very disparaging rejection letter. Now, at one level, they were completely great, it's a shit story. But I've learned since that you do not tell people, start headline saying it's a shit story, this has some redeeming features, but this is wrong with it. But they basically, the guys had a bad day, it was a shit story, he said it was a shit story, and I'm like, do you know what? I'm just going to go and write my Cthulhu and Shadowrun campaigns, because I'm doing exactly the same thing I want to do with stories, except instead of getting ignored or getting some shitty thing from a stranger, my mates come round and we have some beers and we have some pizza and we have a great time. So that's what's delayed me for a long time. What got me out of that funk was in the late 90s. I was at EasterCon, and this Holiday, who I don't know if you know, she's mainly a media writer. She was doing something called One Step Beyond, which weirdly was right down here, actually in Torquay, before I moved down here, one of the first times I came down here, in a hotel that was basically like 40 towers but run by Mrs. Danvers, so that was a bit correct. Well, they used to run Milford, which some of you may have heard of, was Writer's Workshop. Yeah, Milford was run after that. But she wanted to do something for newbies who didn't really know what they were doing. So myself and a bunch of others, I think there were 7 of us, interestingly, 5 men, 2 women, both women, myself and Karen Shriver, the only ones who became pro-writers, just saying. But that was a life-changing thing. It was a week, and I put in a story to critique where, as part of the process, more about the writing process later, a very useful thing is when you have other people at the same level as you, and you give them your stories, they give you theirs, you come up with notes and you share them. And it's not, it was lovely, and nor is it tearing it to shreds, it's finding the good and the bad. So we were doing that in the afternoon. In the morning we were doing writing exercises, all the basic things I should have been doing 5-10 years ago. We were getting characterisation, viewpoint, all that, learning so much. My story was the last one to be critiqued, and it was on Friday afternoon, and it got a very negative critique, and I just sat there going, you're all totally correct. I now know what I've been doing wrong. You know, you don't have to tell me this stuff. They weren't telling me it was terrible, but everything they said was like, yep, yep, and I get that now that I think about it. So that was good, that was a step. We're going to move forward to 2001 when I sold my first professional short story to On Spec magazine. Professional being you get paid more than a penny a word. And then I had a few short stories in a few magazines and anthologies. 2007, by this time I'd finally written my first novel. A lot of writers write multiple first novels because I was lazy and hadn't learnt what I was doing and knew it. My first novel is my first published novel, Principles of Angels. It took a long time to write because the original idea for it I had in 1989, from an offhand comment in a role-playing game, see they are inspirational. I wrote bits of it without having a clue what I was doing. I returned to it after I'd been to One Step Beyond in the late 90s. I reworked it. I got it to a stage where I was as happy with it as I could be at my state of knowledge, but in about 2004, 2005, schlepped it round. We can talk about that later, trying to sell things. No success at all. 2007, I went to Eastercon. I didn't always go to Eastercon because I was working on Saturdays because I was working in retail. It was in Blackpool, I think. Was it Blackpool? Was it Blackpool? Yeah, it was pretty grim. And I had no money, as I normally don't. So I was crashing on somebody's floor, obviously getting a bit old for that. And I realised I'd been on a couple of panels at conventions, and I was on a panel, I can't remember what it was about, but I looked at the lineup. Now Liz Williams was on it, who I knew and liked and everything. So was Jo Fletcher. She was the head editor at Galant's, which you may or may not have heard of, but I certainly hadn't done my research. So she was like gob amongst publishing. So I thought, well, I'd better impress her because this is my one chance. You can't submit to Galant's or any of the big publishers without an agent, and you can't get an agent unless you've got a publishing deal. See the problem there? It doesn't quite work like that, but I was like, this is it. This is my one chance. I must not blow this. I was incredibly nervous, so I got extremely drunk and got 3 hours sleep, which was totally professional and absolutely not a good idea. The panel was on 10 in the morning. I'm not a morning person at the best of times. And I just sat through it, and I had dark glasses on. And I kept thinking, I was saying something, Farah Mendelssohn was on it, so nobody got a word in edgeways anyway. I must say something meaningful. And I can't remember, there was a question that came, I thought I had an answer, and this was the whole costume day, and somebody dressed as that bloody spirit from Spirited Away started gliding down the central bit, and I nudged this woman who said, yes, it's real, and I'm like, okay, that's it, I give up. This is not going to work. So I came out of that, and I looked at myself in the ladies' loo and went, you blew it, you idiot. But we'd all swapped email addresses, because you do on the panel. So I thought, well, if I email Jo, the worst that happens is I hear nothing. So I thought, well, I'll do it. And 3 weeks later, she emailed me back, it took a while, and because I was thinking, you probably don't remember me, we met at Eastercon, I'm wondering if I can send you the manuscript for my novel, blah, blah, blah. And I said, can I send you the submission package, which is a thing to discuss, it's a subset of what you've got. And I kept her email, and I actually printed it out. It said as follows: how could I forget the woman who ordered Alka-Seltzer as her pre-panel drink, send me the entire manuscript? 3 weeks after that, she offered me a 3-book deal. Wow. This is, yeah, I know, literally could knock me over with a feather. That was, you couldn't make it up, and it genuinely happened. That was a lucky break, and we talk about in the writers' panel about generating your own luck. That was, so mainly the important things are get drunk and impress editors.
So sometimes it's being in the right place at the right time as much as anything else.
Utterly is, and I do feel sorry for so many authors out there, good authors, who are trying to go the trad route. Obviously other routes are available, and it is about getting that lucky break, and my lucky break was all about being impressively hungover. It doesn't work for everyone.
There you go, yeah. Get hungover more often.
Yeah.
Got a card?
I'll give it a thought.
If only you drank alcohol.
There's your problem. I'll remind him when he sobers up.
Yeah. So you've mentioned a lot of names of people that you read as a youngster. So what are your main influences?
A lot of the TV stuff that I've watched, I think, is writers. The 2 writers I admire the most, and I can't make my mind up on any given day which one is my absolute favourite, are Terry Pratchett and Ian M. Banks. Ian M. Banks has influenced me more because nobody could write like Pratchett. They're very wide influences, I think. I can't remember what I answered on there on my own thing. I think I probably did most. I don't know what I said. No, usually what I said.
Star Trek.
Oh yes, Star Trek.
Fanderson and
Yeah.
Blake Seven.
I'm Ursula Gwynn, obviously, who, having read... No, don't be honest.
Not allowed to read
Having read the Wizard of Earthsea, I read everything that she'd ever done. And of course, she's kind of was a genius and brought in so many different things. I think that's probably the answer to that question.
So role-playing has definitely been an influence on writing, especially as you're a fantasy writer.
Well, I'm science fiction.
Well, fantasy fiction, yeah. But what about other genres?
I like detective fiction. I like mystery stuff, but I think it's very difficult to write well. And consuming stuff media-wise, I'd say 90% of what I watch is mystery detective type stuff. But I think the reason I do that, and some people may sympathise with this, is because at the end, and I only watch the ones where this does happen, the baddies it gets sorted out, the baddies get brought to justice. Even if something horrible happens en route, you do get justice, you do get where you need to be. Writing it, of course, you have to go backwards from the end in a way where I'm aware that people that write this, and most of the readers, have a lot more experience of how it's constructed. I do read some detective fiction, but I'm still trying to catch up on my science fiction. And I don't know whether I could do a standard detective mystery type book, but I'd like to try.
They are very hard.
Yes, they are. I have a lot of admiration for people that pull it off.
It's really hard to get a body on paper on, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. Now, do you still have to do that, though?
Well, what do you think of things like the Dresden Files, the paranormal detective?
Question. I like them. The Dresden Files itself, I felt, went off the end of where the inspiration was.
Yeah.
With all due respect to Jim and everything, he's one of the first people that did that. But I like the paranormal ones, and I like that element, and that's even cleverer to me because you're constructing a mystery, and you're bringing all those things in, and I try to get around to doing something like that.
I must admit, I wish the television series went further than one season.
Yes,
because
they were just
I
getting to
loved
the
it.
interesting bit. They were getting to the interesting bit, for sure.
So my next question, apparently, is: do you want to write, or do you write to music?
I do. I don't have to now, but I do like to music, and I find that the moods. I have music on all the time in the background. Radio 6 normally, or playlists depending, but certainly initially I had to write to music. My head wouldn't let me actually write something unless I was listening to the right thing. You get a lot less picky when you become a pro author. Things like deadlines, having to write in the car or on a train or whatever because you believe a deadline means you have to be less picky. But in my garret, I had an actual garret in my old house, well, loft conversion. In my garret, I'd have whatever music was playing. A lot of writers say they can't write to music because of the lyrics, and they're right. Unless I know the lyrics so well that I don't hear them, I can't write to something that's got words. The tempo is very important to me. So if the slow tempo for something that's contemplative, something that is more in the character's head, I write most of my fight scenes to banging millennial techno, which I like anyway, so everybody gets to hear that, whether they want it or not. I did try writing to classical music, but I found that when I wrote to Mozart's Requiem, it just got very purple, so we don't do that.
Recently, I know this not just from the question, but from talking to you, you had a major change in your career.
Yes.
Some for good, some for bad. So, computer games. You're now writing for computer games. Tell everyone everything, all the secrets you're not allowed to tell,
Excellent.
all the NDAs you had to write, just ignore them, just go for it.
Okay, there won't be any problem with that. So, cynic that I am, it is very hard to make a living from fiction. I had a 3-book deal with Galantza, one of the top publishers, and followed by another 2. I've had 2-book deal with Angry Robot. I've had other stuff out from various things. Unless you do A, produce several books a year, and B, sell very well, you will not make a living from writing fiction. Sorry about that. So I had various crap part-time day jobs. I got my book deal in 2007, so I had sort of about 8 years of various crap part-time day jobs. Also, husband who was supporting me working full-time, so we didn't have to worry too much about things. But I wanted to write for a living if I could, but at the same time I thought, well, the other thing that a lot of writers do as another string to their bow, some of my day jobs were like casual ones, is to teach. So I took a course in teaching adults, and I ran a course locally for people learning the craft, which was tricky because they were a lot of them members of the WI and none of them were geeks, and I had to pick my examples with care to actually relate to them, which was not great, but it was useful for them, and I think it was useful for me to an extent. But I had a friend who was quite high up in a company called Creative Assembly, which does Total War games. Some of you might have heard of tactical games. Who we actually, and this is shameless nepotism, by the way, again, luck and nepotism. He'd been playing in my husband's Forgotten Realms campaign since forever. He didn't talk about his work very much, but we knew that it was an important thing. He said, well, as part of the, and this is the phrase he used, minion enrichment program, Creative Assembly like to give their people nice things to do, so they get like yoga classes and massage and stuff. And he said, well, we were thinking of maybe teaching creative writing to some of the designers to improve their storytelling abilities in the game. And I just qualified to do this, and I said, well, I'll kind of pitch the course to you. And he said, yeah, that seems to cover it all. So I started by teaching in what was their lunch hours, game designers, creative writing. It taught me a lot, by the way, to teach others. I hadn't realised how much you could learn from other people's perspectives on writing. That's probably true in other creative endeavours as well. But I really enjoy doing it, and I still do it a bit now, because I learn from it and I enjoy it. But off the back of that, they had some proofreading, some qualified proofreading as well, for me to do. And then they were like, well, actually, we've got some contract writing. You could just do some of this. It wasn't the most interesting stuff in the world. It was largely barks, which is the stuff. So when you've got a video game and you've got people killing each other, they're like, over here, come on. My friend and technically boss, Mike, used to call it 50 ways to say yes, sir. Because they're short, they're just the things that people are saying in combat or whatever. But from that, I started to write other things, longer, more complex dialogue, descriptions of items. This was all freelance. So it was great. So I was doing it alongside a bit of my fiction, but it paid a lot better. In the 2021, oh, there was a slight diversion into writing for Warhammer. Yes, didn't work out very well. I'll come back to the development. So without whinging too much about people I shouldn't be whinging about, I've written some short stories for Warhammer, Black Library. So I wrote a novel which they commissioned, and we went through. There's a lot of editorial control, same as there is writing franchises like Doctor Who, which I've also written for. You have a lot of, you know, it's actually this, and this. So I wrote this under quite a lot of constraints during lockdown, gave it to them, they sat on it for 18 months. A new editor had come in, and he went through it, and he said, so this bit of plot doesn't work. And I said, well, I kind of was showing off this feature of the game. He said, well, no, we changed that, but we've got a new rule book for that, because that's how they make their money. You can't do that anymore. And I'm like, well, that's kind of how my plot works. And so he said, well, we can't publish this. So yeah, so that wasn't great. So I'd written that, but I got paid, I paid for it, but I didn't get my name out there as a Warhammer writer, which is a nice little gravy train to get on it. So yes, that was annoying. At the end of 2021, I was contacted by Richard Morgan. Have you heard of Altered Carbon? So it published by Glance at the same time as I was. We went to some great parties. It was really good one in the cocktail bar. So, yeah, anyway, that one. I like him. He holds some views that I disagree with. I think some of you know what they are. And we've had some discussions about that. It's living proof that you can like someone, consider them a friend, and still disagree with them about certain areas. So, you know, stayed in touch a bit. And he knew that my first novel is quite cyberpunky. Oh, I forgot to mention William Gibson as an influence. Yeah, it's the only influence I forgot. I knew I'd forgotten one. I love cyberpunk. So he knew I'd written cyberpunk short stories, and Principles of Angels is quite cyberpunky in places. And he was writing as a consultant on a new game, which is a battle royale, which basically the premise is that everybody kills everybody else. Not my kind of game at all, really. But there was a cyberpunk theme to it. So he recruited me for the company that's making that game, which was, the first 6 months was the best work I've ever done from the point of view of, they could have paid me almost, but they weren't, and that's the great thing. So A, I'm getting paid every month without having to argue about invoices. Fantastic. I'm getting paid quite a lot every month, and I'm getting to write cyberpunk fun stuff. Now, I'm not really going to break my NDA here, because it's not a secret. So, have you heard of Neil Blomkamp? This is the way I'm going to punch Neil Blomkamp in the balls story. So, he was the creative consultant on that game, but let's just say that he didn't do his job. He didn't want to do any work. He wanted the money to run his studio. So, the first thing that happened is that he gave us a whole bunch of stuff, which was rehashed Hollywood stuff that we were meant to put into the game. And my boss was like, not sure about this. So we had a meeting with him. There's all, you know, Zooms and Hollywood and everything. And he basically blanked us as soon as we didn't tell him he was a genius and started to question. And they didn't want any more meetings with us, and then there was high-level stuff going above my pay grade. And then my boss left on a Friday afternoon and was fired summarily because he disagreed. And it kind of went downhill from there. So until that all happened, I was having an absolutely brilliant time. But then Yeah, kind of sort of still under NDA. But if anyone tells you the game industry is mad, I can confirm that. It is very Wild West. There's no rules. The things, the amount of money they waste on things, the things that actually, changing their mind. There was a point when most of the rest of the narrative team got fired. We just recruited 2 new writers because we thought, turned Boom Camp's crap vision into something that was going to work in the game. We sat on that for 6 weeks or whatever. And then we had a meeting and we was like, yeah, we might do that in the later season, but I don't like that. We'll do something completely different. And I've just spent the last 6 months making this work. And we recruited new writers because there was a lot of material to write. And then there was a sort of awkward period. And then they fired the new writers and one of the other members of the narrative team, apropos of nothing. And then we were told that he would be writing the narrative, except he wouldn't talk to us and hadn't talked to us, so we didn't know what was going on at all. A little bit before that, I used to look at the org chart to check where I still had a job, not joking. And I saw somebody on the org chart who's marked as a writer. And it's one of his mates who's helped write script stuff. So we had another person in the team, but we didn't know who that was. We hadn't spoken to them. And then when we talked to our boss, the producer said, oh yeah, you better start talking to this guy. So he's in LA, so obviously time differences. He was a nice chap, but he was not the world's hardest worker. He was basically a stoner surf dude. He was really sweet. I met him when he came over to the studio, but he really did not want to do any actual work, ideally, if he could avoid it, which was kind of fine by us because we were being paid. But yes, we had this weird team that was just the remnants thereof. I was kind of the most senior at this point, which was a bit weird. So I rebranded us after they fired half the narrative team as the content creation team, because we weren't allowed to do any narrative because it all belonged to Bloom Camp. So we literally couldn't say we were writing narrative, but no one was writing the narrative or the lore. And that went on for several months. And then he came up with some ideas. Then we realised what he was doing is whatever film he watched last week, he was getting us to do it. So there was a bit where we were like rewriting the whole thing like Dunkirk. And this was in summer of 2023. So there was a point where I thought we were going to get Nazi Barbies with nukes work out the films that he was watching. Yeah. We didn't. I then got headhunted by my old boss who'd been fired, and I'm now working at a different company, doing a different game. However, it's just as mad because in the 8 months I've been there, they've changed their mind 3 times about what the game is. And I work with a Chinese studio, which is a very different way of working, and now I have to get up early as opposed to staying up late for meetings. But it's not something which is working out as well as it did. Oh, I'm getting so cynical about all this. It is a fun ride, it is mad, and I love being paid every month.
Yeah.
But I do quite often just, get out of the meeting and just go and stand in the garden and scream. We've got off piece on the fiction.
That's fine. So it's that balance between, is the money enough to be worth the screaming?
Yeah, well, these days, sadly, with husbands who can't work, it has to be.
Yeah.
Which kind of put the pressure on that one.
Yeah.
I mean, I still do editing and teaching and mentoring on the side as a thing because I could literally lose my job at any time. I realised that in the first company, and working with a Chinese company even more. So yeah, not for the faint-hearted. You can all experience my pain precariously, but don't go there. How far have we gone?
We're going to quite well, actually. We're down to about 10. We've got plenty of time. What recent reads would you recommend to me?
Oh, right, yes, me. I went with my shelves. So, Infinity Gate by Mike Carey is one of the best multiverse books I've ever read. It's so it's sort of science fiction, but it's different parallel versions of reality, and it's beautifully constructed. The sequel is good, but not as good as the first one, so often the case when you try to do that. Titanium Noir, that is noir, detective stuff, doesn't about with a cyberpunk twist. That's Nick Harkaway. And weirdly, things I've actually been reading, I'm saying I like detective mystery stuff, the Green Man stuff by Juliet McKenna, I know some other people are fans of that here, which is kind of, it's contemporary mystery-ish with occult stuff, so that's kind of, if you haven't read it, if you like the Dresden, you have, haven't you?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, Green Man's there, get on it, right, get on it. No, it's not the British version of the Dresden Files, because the Dresden Files obviously, it's a different setup, it's an actual PI. This is a guy who's got dryad blood in him, and I admire her as a writer very much, not least because she's writing a male character, which is obviously hard to do when you're female and like female to male. But I'd be interested to know, actually, because Dave says, this is my husband, says that he's convinced by this character as being male, and I'm like, anyway, they're very good. They're very easy read. They're very pleasant. Similar with more mystery and occult and less actual detective stuff, because there are quite often crimes that need solving in the Green Man, is Liz Williams' Fallow Sisters novels. I'm not just saying that she's a mate. And those are occult. Some of the stuff I think actually did happen in Glastonbury, knowing her and knowing Glastonbury. Some of it is not that fictional. Some of it is just her life story. Yeah, we know that's normal for Glastonbury. So those are great. So yes, if anyone wants a bit of occulty mystery stuff, I don't read as much science fiction as I used to, even though I should go back and catch up on things. I just find I'm fussier about it. I got very fussy about fantasy actually. I hardly ever read fantasy now. I read a lot when I was growing up. I was obsessed with Tolkien. Anything that was Tolkien-esque, that was it. I loved it. And then when I discovered science fiction, and I'm going to circle back to something else for several moments. I was definitely the only person I knew that read science fiction and fantasy. I was kind of the only person I knew that read books for pleasure. When I got to Hatfield Poly, which is now University of Hertfordshire, so I call it uni for young people, so I think I went to uni, there was a science fiction society, and I didn't know what to think. And I remember sitting down and talking to them at Fresh Spare or whatever, and I'm like, oh my God, these people read this stuff. It's not abnormal. I'm not the only person in the universe. This is brilliant. I then had to try and catch up, so I went and read a lot of the classic stuff, did not get up in fine lines of misogyny at all. Asimov, yeah, all right, probably Arthur C. Clarke preferred all the three, but there's so much I haven't caught up on. So I kind of abandoned fantasy, really, for that. Where were we? I can't remember. What were we actually talking about?
Books.
Oh, let's talk more about books.
Yes.
More
Are you
about
still
books.
writing?
I-
Novels and stories in amongst all of the chaos and confusion?
Not as much as I'd like to be, because I'm spending 8 hours a day writing NPC backgrounds and dialogue and plot lines. I get to the end of that and I've not got any brain left for my own fiction, which is the other bad thing about writing for video games. Much as I have issues with the job and the setup, I love the work because I'm being paid to write. Even if none of it gets used because they keep changing their mind or some idiot film director comes in and fires half a tea, still being paid to write, which is excellent. But it doesn't leave me very much at the end of the day, really, to do, which I don't like the fact that I'm not. I've got a novel I started in 2022, I think it was, which has got detective things. It's got a murder. It's a weird occult murder. It's a secondary world fantasy. Well, it's not fantasy, really. It's science fantasy. And it's got a murder in it, but the other thing that I wanted to put in it, which is something I heard on radio years ago, anyone come across the idea of sin eaters? It's fascinating. Yeah, isn't it fascinating? And I don't think anyone's really explored this. There's a book called The Sin Eater Story. So a sin eater, the idea is that when someone is dying and they want to get rid of their sins, they basically, somebody takes it from them by eating a symbolic of bread and salt. Originally, I think it might be Welsh Borders type.
Yeah, I think it originated in Wales.
Yeah, I think it did. So somebody takes your sins on so that you can move on. And I thought, well, what if they actually do? What if they actually, don't someone steal it, or to steal it, do a good job on it, because I'm very slow on doing this. What if they actually absorb that person's memories? And what if, of course, there's a memory of the murder, blah, blah, the memories you're going to get. Firstly, it's the fact that what will those characters be like? What will those people be like that do that? And secondly, what memories are you going to get, and how much plot can you get out of that? The answer is a lot, more than I have time to do. But I got quite into my actual confederation of sin eaters, because what would you be like if that's what you did? If your job was every few weeks to go and be with someone who's dying and relive their life, and the memories fade after a while, but they're still part of you. And I'm still getting my head around how I'm going to communicate that. And I've come up with a cast of characters who deal with it in different ways, which vary from wild hedonism to deep depression. But I want to have more brain to do that idea justice. So
Just, well, from the sin eating thing,
yeah.
People that did it, they were outcasts.
These guys are outcasts, but they're also revered at the same time. So
Yeah.
They wear a mask so you don't know who they are, so if you pass them in the street you wouldn't know them. So they take on that personality, along with taking on the job, but then the rest of the time they're known that that's what they do, and people are like, they're doing a fantastic job. And this is actually, as I say, science fantasy. There's a whole technological, weird, psychic thing going on, because that's the shit that I like doing. And so there's actually more going on in the background as well as that. As well as what's going on in their head, there's other things going on elsewhere. It's being nicely vague here because I'm still sorting it out myself.
The Sin Eater appears in Sleepy Hollow.
Oh, yeah, I'm not surprised. Yeah, that's
He's actually the son of the lead male character.
Ah.
I won't say any more because
Yeah, I should be.
Spoilers, sweetie, spoilers.
Yeah, I should revisit that. But yes, that's my current obsession, but I've been obsessing over it for like 2 years without actually producing much novel. I will at some point.
So it's going to sit and digest and
Yeah, at some point.
eventually
Yeah,
explode
but
over.
possibly not while I'm doing the day job.
So you talked about the weirdness of Glastonbury. That brings us to, because Dave put it in the programme.
He did. We have to talk
we
about
have to
this.
talk about it. The other way I know you, because
Yes.
I know you from Armadacon, and the first time we met at Armadacon, we looked at each other and went,
I know you from somewhere.
something.
Yeah, something.
You're also a reenactor.
We are.
And in fact, we're part of the same reenactment group.
We are.
So we know Glastonbury very well. So, but in my experience, there's a lot of reenactors who are science fiction, fantasy fans, and role players.
Very much.
It
Yeah.
does seem to come together, and is that what got you into role playing? That
Well,
escapism?
it was actually a parallel thing. They were going on at the same time. So I was getting into tabletop role play, and that was escapism. It was pure escapism from my shitty job that I hated. But that was sort of late 80s, early 90s. My first reenactment group was the Far Isles. Yeah. So, and I think it was someone, and that was someone I met through science fiction fandom. And they said, well, we do this thing where we basically dress up, pretend to be other people, and eat really lots of food. And I'm like, I am in. So I did that, and I was with Far Isles quite a lot of the 90s. I got well into making the costumes as a thing in itself, because I'm a crafter, and it's like, fantastic, there's something I can make that I haven't made, that I can wear, that's not going to fill my house with crocheted shite that I'm doing by default, or embroidery that nobody wants. So I got into that from that point of view. The Far Isles are not a show society, they're not open to the public, they are not that authentic. It's great fun, so they can probably vouch for this. It's great fun, but it's not reenactment in the, to the same serious extent where you have to buy your own tent.
Yeah.
And as the various other people here know, then that's a more likely
Several
tents.
Looking
And
at
guns
people.
in some cases,
Yeah.
yes, guns.
Yeah, we're looking at people.
We're looking at people. But yes, so I did the light version, and then I got into the more serious version.
Yeah.
Initially with a group which, this will be familiar to some people in reenactment, where the couple that were in charge of it violently broke up partway through and the group went to pieces. And then I joined another one for a few years, and guess what happened to that one? Although they're still going, actually. And then I moved down here and then fixed myself on the fence lot. Lucky people. There's definitely a huge crossover.
Yeah.
You guys are geekier than the last groups I was in. It was actually quite nice when I found you lot, because the geek references I did with the previous society, a couple of people would get them, and then others would be like, and I'm like, okay, I just need to not, talk about Marvel or Doctor or whatever, because they're not necessarily going to get those.
Do you find your experience with reenactment has influenced your fantasy writing?
Not sure reenactment has. My tabletop role-playing, GMing and writing, has experienced both my writing for games, obviously, and my writing for fiction, because the bottom line, the lesson I learned then, no plans to have contact with the players.
Yep.
So it's no plans to have contact
There's
with
a
the
lot of role
characters.
plays here.
Yeah, you get that.
Yeah.
And for fiction, that actually translates to you as an author may have this fantastic plot that you want your characters to go through. If your characters, and you've done them properly, are reacting in the way that they should be to stay in character, and they tell you to shove the plot because they're going over there, you just have to roll with it.
Sounds like players.
Yeah, it's extremely like, I mean, technically speaking, they're all just in my head, and I can make it through. And like early stuff, I would make my characters go and do the thing that I wanted to happen in my plot, and those stories were a bit shit.
My experience is my role playing, especially fantasy role playing, is definitely got more interesting and improved because of my reenactments. The actual for the role players, the D&Ds, and some of your reenactors as well, putting the armour on, and you spend all day in it.
No, you don't.
You don't. You know.
Yes, I think if your GM has done reenactment, you
Yeah.
can expect to have a much harder time of it as a player,
There-
because they're not going to let you get away with that shit, because it doesn't work like
There's
that.
There's that wonderful table of putting armour on in the D&D books, which anybody who's ever done reenactment knows it's a load of rubbish.
Yeah.
But
everybody in armour should automatically fail their stealth roll.
Yes, it's not possible to sneak in plate mail. It's just
Yeah.
not.
It is also not possible to sneak in leather armour. No matter what D&D tells you.
Creaky. Unless
I
magic
especially
though.
knew leather armour.
Yeah, don't forget,
tried to
unless
climb
magic,
a
it's
tree
D&D.
in full plate.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
thought he could get away with it because he was an elf.
Yeah. See, that doesn't really help.
But
Not really.
oh, and
Different actual aspect, because you're saying not to be sneaky in leather armour and whatever, just suddenly occurred to me. Apparently during the Second World War, the Americans and the British, they knew the Germans were there because the Germans had leather webbing.
Oh,
And,
creaks.
and
Yeah.
they used to know the Germans were coming because they could hear them
creaking.
creaking.
yeah.
Yeah.
And they wore jackboots.
That's also not very stealthy.
Yeah.
so
Rob Nelson.
we're coming to the end. I've got a couple more, but let's open it up to questions. Anybody got any questions?
You're not obliged to, it's fine.
Okay.
Oh, two.
What did your neighbours think of you standing in the garden screaming?
I have quite an enclosed garden and I also live in Dawlish, as does Richard here, and it's quite normal for Dawlish. We're the deaf in Dawlish. We're the younger generation down there. Up there from here.
So I had a bit of a what I call a bow jam in the book I was reading recently, where the characters had gone to this posh restaurant and were having a meal, and it was set in a period where they wouldn't have had the food that they are.
Yeah.
How do you manage it? Do you let food come into your books?
It's funny you should say that actually, because my sin eaters, they meet up to eat. And the putting of food in books, it was a few years ago, it was very much a thing you did in a YA book, because you get people, and when I read it, if it's done well, it's vivid. There are some things which can bring a reader into your story. Smell is one of them. Taste can be, but it can be overdone. I don't necessarily need everything that's going on at the table. I just want to know that they ate something which is piquant that I can then go, yeah, fresh bread, whatever. So yes, I use it, but it's one of those things to use but not overuse, I would say, taste generally.
It's a fascinating, you just said a fascinating idea. Sin eaters getting together
To eat a meal.
to eat a meal.
It's deliberate.
And of course, given that they're experiencing
Yeah.
other person's personalities,
Yes.
it's a fascinating idea.
Yes, when they meet up, they try and time it so they haven't just done the job, because you can't really, you're being somebody else for a day or two. But it's things like, they live in the moment, they have to live in the moment for their sanity. So things like sex or food that are instant gratification are very meaningful to the sin eaters in my universe, because that's safe and that's themselves and that's just them, and it's not complicated. It's hedonism, momentary, gone. Anything else impinges on the memories that aren't theirs and makes it more confusing.
Do you find as a DM, when you were running a fantasy game, did you do a lot of research? I mean, I'm a geeky geek. I do research about all sorts of.
Didn't very much fantasy. My husband ran the very long-running Forgotten Realms campaign, which was brilliant. He actually, if you see him around, he does exist. He does exist, people.
I have seen
No,
him.
I've been introduced to him. He does exist.
He does exist. But he actually was role-playing. He's one of the role-playing players. He was playing the original D&D stuff in the original Forgotten Realms when people were developing it in the 70s. So he actually had loads of stuff on that. So I kind of felt that niche was full. I mean, the main games I ran were Call of Cthulhu and Shadowrun, which you don't have to do a huge amount. Well, I did quite a lot of Call of Cthulhu. Oh, yes, proud moments as well. Other things I wrote Freeform. One of my proudest gaming moments. We used to live somewhere that had a steam train, streamline. So I ran a weekly Cthulhu game for four-ish people. My dear husband was the bad guy. He's actually quite evil in a good way, and they never sussed it. So they run this whole thing's going on, and there's stuff going on, and it's actually him doing it. That's great. Then I decided to bring that to a head by doing a freeform, for which that was one of 18 plot lines, and there were 50 players, and I hired a steam train. I can tell you that's as much work as writing a novel. Awful costume, obviously. And it only came out during that game that he was the bad guy. This is one of my proudest GMing moments, because that happened for real, with people screaming at each other. We were, you know, at this point we were actually in an upstairs room of the pub rather than on the steam train. I made sure that didn't even what happened in the pub safely away from everybody. But yeah, that was one of my proudest GMing moments.
So sometimes you have those moments as a GM and you go, yeah,
that worked.
Nearly getting punched once.
Yeah.
One of the players, I shouldn't really talk about this, but yeah, one of the players I thought was going to punch me when we came to the end of the game.
Yeah.
So those things
I love it, yeah. Yeah, I've done one on a tabletop one. Insane Clown Posse, you probably haven't heard about it. I'm not a great fan of rap, but they did something very, it was kind of dark Americana, and me and Dave used to run games together. It's how we break on run games anymore. And we ran a game, it wasn't a free form, but it was kind of, there were 12 or 14 players we DM'd them. My proud moment then, this was technically a tabletop game, so is where one of the players, you know the bit where John Cleese does this, and holds himself and then starts jumping up and down. In fact, one of my players did that. It was fabulous. I was like, how do you do that? And this is a tabletop. He basically stepped away, bent over, and just went, ah, ah, ah. Job done.
So you GM? Do you ever do conventions?
I have done. That's another thing that's happened, is that I don't really write and run very much now, because a bit of that actually happened when I started to have my fiction published seriously. It's mainly the 90s and early 90s that I did lots of GMing, and then I very much admire writers who can do multiple things. So I was running role-playing games, and then I was doing 10 years of fiction, and now I'm doing video games, and I can't do them all. I wish I could. So I have done stuff at various conventions, but not for over a decade.
Do you still role play?
Oh yeah, I play in various games. Yeah, I've got 3 different campaigns going on that I am just a punter in, and I very much enjoy that.
Good. More questions?
Back when you were doing kind of more of everything, if a story idea popped into your head, do you know that's a role-playing story I need to run, that's something I need to write down as a short story or novel, that's something else, or are they all kind of...
For me, because I was focusing on one of those things at a given time, there was actually a point where there has been a couple of crossovers, so I set a couple of one-off games in the Hidden Empire universe, particularly Kesh City, which is the city in Principles of Angels, because it's a really interesting city, I think. Which I can talk more about with people unless they stop me, because I haven't actually talked about that. But yeah, I thought it was such an interesting place that I wrote a couple of games set in there, you know, just not full, a couple of session worth of games, not full campaigns, because I'd already come up with a setting I wanted to do. But I found that idea-wise, I was either developing the story or I was developing the game, and it was more the timing of it as to which. You haven't asked me about my obsessions.
What are you obsessed with? And that's legally. Legally.
Okay, that limits it a bit. I love the idea of divided worlds and paradoxes. So Kesh City is a floating city. The top of it, it's very rich. There's a lot of decadence, affluence. The laws are very, lax, because it's all about everybody having fun. Below it, it's gravity floating above the planet, is basically veins hanging down, which are part of the environmental controls, and the outcasts live down there. So you've got the contrast of top and bottom, and I love that kind of thing. And the other thing in Kesh City, which never gets old, and I think it's one of the ideas I had right at the beginning, and it's more true than it ever has been before. Kesh City is a democracy by assassination, so citizens, the ones that live on the top, can vote to have their politicians killed by the people who live on the bottom. And I really think that's a valid form of government, and we should seriously look into that. Yeah, it's funny that. Sadly, that's not how it works out.
No. So, any more questions? Okay.
That crime writer you mentioned earlier, I didn't catch the name. The ones you're reading.
Juliet McKenna, if you want the Green Man one. So she writes very widely, science fiction and fantasy. And they're more mysteries. They're quite, I won't use the wrong word, they're not cozies, but the main character, he's, see me afterwards, I'll give you the details. But yeah, he's just getting on with his life, he's got an affinity to nature, he's not hippie by any means, he's quite straightforward chap that just wants to get jobs done and wants things to be done right. You're not righting wrongs in a vigilante way, it's just like, well, that's a problem that I can help solve, so I'm going to have to do it because I'm a decent bloke, which is just very appealing to me.
Okay, thank you.
What's next, fiction-wise?
That's
what
what
it
I
says
already
here.
did, yeah.
Oh, okay, all right.
That's not about
Okay,
images.
so if there's nothing else, my last question. I grant you 3 wishes through the power of being the...
Yeah, these are really quick. Okay,
Yeah.
a small lottery win, just so I don't have to do the video game thing. And my last 2 are very similar. One is that hell opens up under Putin and swallows him. The other one is hell opens up under Trump and swallows him.
Yes.
Oh yes, so there is a shameless self-promotion. Yeah, I thought I'd leave that to the end.
Okay, thank you. Shameless self-promotions. Books are on sale over there in the dealer's room. You get them cheaper than the actual cover price because they're technically speaking, I'm not meant to be selling them because they're published copies. Also, I have a Patreon, who doesn't these days. Owing to the vagaries of the publishing industry, the only way you can actually hear my stuff as audiobooks is through my Patreon. Come to my reading tomorrow.
Just suddenly thinking with your Sin Eaters.
Yes.
What if you
I'm willing to
made,
steal anybody's ideas, bring it on.
what if you made Trump and
Oh!
Putin Sin Eaters?
Oh, they just explode.
So they would have that vile part of them, plus...
That's right up with my democracy by assassination. That's one of those wish fulfillment. Writing is therapy, and we do work things out. So yeah, in my head that would be a fantastic thing to happen. But I would just settle for them not existing.
Right.
We wouldn't do that.
Where does Nigel Farage fit onto that?
Okay, if I get a 4th wish, he's going to. I do need to get the small lottery win.
I think they should all get together, fall down into hell, and you get a spare wish.
If they were in the same place, I would get a spare wish. I should have timed that better. No one ever gets the 3 wishes thing right, do they? I mean, best case scenario, it's not quite right. Worst case scenario, it backfires and they all die.
It's always down to the little details.
Fine print.
Yeah, it's like being a writer.
Very much so.
In that, oh, there's a question, sorry.
Imagine the poor sin eater that actually fed off Trump or Putin.
I know, well, this is what I'm doing, and I feel very sorry for them because that would just be, yeah, unspeakable. That would be the worst thing.
Nah, Charlie Manson.
If the Sin Eater gets the memories of Uncle Gerald, would all Uncle Gerald's relatives not be after them to find out where that hidden bucket of silver might
That
be?
is one of the plots I'm thinking. There's so many plots with this
Yeah.
that I've actually got a plethora of plots. I've got to work out which things I want to do because I don't want to get too unfocused because I think this is probably a series of books. But I want to get it right because it's such an interesting idea and these are the kind of things that I'm thinking of, but I will steal your ideas.
How about Sin Eaters who actually have to take sin away from people who have Alzheimer's?
Who don't remember it? That's a very interesting question. I haven't thought of that. See, I'm going to think about that as to whether
Because
if
then they're going
if
to
you've
get,
lost the consciousness.
they're going to get fragments of memory.
Yeah, the way my world is set up, they would probably get what the real memories were, regardless of what the person's state is now. So.
Are the sin eaters allowed to refuse to eat somebody's sins?
They're
Or
not.
are there rules about
Yes.
what's going to come to them?
For somebody not to be absolved and have their sins eaten is the most terrible thing because you only go to heaven. Spoiler alert: heaven's not as great as people think it is. If you've had your sins absolved and eaten, and if a sin eater refuses the job, then basically they definitely are an outcast. Most sin eaters go mad after a while. It's very hard to maintain your sanity, which is why they are both revered and outcast at the same time. At the back, sorry.
Do the sin eaters have to? Do the sin eaters have to think they've sinned because people like Putin don't?
That's an interesting question. It's the definition of sin is indeed one of the things that I am still thinking about with this, because what the sin eater gets is what the person regrets. And you're right, if somebody is a monster like Putin and doesn't have any regrets, they won't get as many memories. That is really good. You see, this is great. You guys can help me with this. I'm going to put you all down in the acknowledgements.
What would happen if, because you just described Fenn as not being as fun as most people think, what would happen if a biblical angel bumped into one of your cities.
I think that would definitely be one of those things that you can't necessarily, yeah, that's gone off on a whole different track and made my head explode. Not in a bad way.
It's suddenly thinking, you know, then a person like Putin dies,
We can hope.
right? And what you have is the Sin Eaters. So he, as far as he's concerned, no Sin Eater, whatever. So it's actually going to be those around Putin who feel like he needs to be helped to move on to the next existence or whatever. So the Sin Eater comes there. So would you then also not only have the Sin Eater with the memories, but you also have the ghost of the Putin type person?
The ghost is another, and I'm still working out exactly what happens when somebody dies in this, because it's not the normal universe at all. Because why would I want the normal universe when I can have weird ones?
Because you can then have another character in the form of the ghost.
Yeah.
And who's the ghost? Is the ghost going to haunt somebody? Or?
One of the things I do need to work out is what happens after you, quote, die, and how that comes back to affect the actual world that people live in. You know?
Do you recommend then writing down the rules of your universe before you start?
I do that, and I have to say in my day job, my reputation, I actually call myself the law master, because I am, the way my head works is I'm very much a world builder, and I think this is, a lot of it's doing tabletop role playing, working out how, and also just how I'm wired, is that I have a lot of reference stuff for my worlds, because my worlds tend to be complicated and paradoxical and weird, and I love world building. So that's true in games and in fiction for me, but that's just me. I mean,
but also in GMing, you've got
in GMing I've done it, absolutely.
Of players trying to break the rules.
Yes.
So you're therefore better at making rules that are consistent and work.
Yes, and I try and do it in advance, because I'm not so good when they spring something on you and you think, oh, God, I haven't thought of that loophole that they're just driving a truck through now.
Dr. Bob?
It's kind of two questions. Is there another religion in your world that doesn't do the sin-eating thing? And the other one is have you ever read Sherry Tepper's books? Because there's a lot of them, they're nothing like your sin-eating thing, but there's one of the things in her books is most societies have a big lie at the heart of them.
Yes, I love the big lie.
Yeah.
The big lie, yeah, very much, as well as the divided world. I love the big lie.
Yeah.
This world, like a lot of my worlds, not what it seems. People are being spun a lie. Absolutely, they are.
Yeah.
There's an empress, not entirely dissimilar to the whole emperor in 40k, as in eternal but not really eternal. And I think you can guess where the psychic energy goes. Spoiler. But yes, I absolutely love it when what you think is about it. None of my worlds are what they seem, and that's kind of the fun for me, is creating worlds where then the characters. Freudian slip. The characters finding out what the world's really like is the moments I enjoy writing at least as much as any inter-character stuff. But again, that's just how my head works. So if you want weird shit world building, I am your woman.
Nothing? Okay, well, in that case, thank you, Jane. It's been fantastic.
For letting me make you ask questions.
Shall I check the answers now?
Yeah, I didn't get all of those right.
No, you didn't.